Hikaru and Ding were playing against one another, this London system as black, with bishop f5 and h6, black was scoring really, really well. Oops, and they're off, Peter. Sorry.
They are off, and I noticed that. I didn't mean to interrupt you by suddenly clicking on the diagram, but this is. I kept on mentioning it for the first 2 days that they played against each other, but I went through their games prior to the show today, and this is actually going to be the first Catalan, which is quite interesting considering that I'm pretty sure Ding played the Catalan against Hikaru in at least one of their previous online events this season. But Ding doesn't go for the main line. I think they discussed the main line previously, at least in 2 games, maybe even 3. But Ding instead goes for the move Queen b3 after Knight of 3 castles, a very, very rare move. I will admit I know absolutely nothing about. Queen c2 I have some idea of. Queen b3 just no, none whatsoever. But Hikaru does not seem surprised, and he blitzes out c5, c takes d5, queen takes d5. A logical continuation, I'm sure, offering the straight of queens. White takes on c5, and Hikaru takes on b3 and goes knight c6. So far, so good. Both of them appear to be reasonably well booked up here, which is not that surprising in case of Ding, because clearly that was his preparation for today. Somewhat more surprised in case of Hikaru, not because he doesn't have opening preparation, but because, as I mentioned, Queen b3 is a very, very rare move.
Exactly.
I don't believe I've seen it very much at all, and you normally just don't expect this to happen. But I think what Hikaru is doing is just perfectly healthy. And
when you said, Peter, that this was the first Catalan, for me that was a real surprise. I mean, like, what, really? I mean, because for me, Ding Liren has a very deserved reputation as a darn good Catalan player. So it was like, what has he been doing? Avoiding Catalan.
He played a couple of English openings, and also perhaps we would have had Catalans, but Hikaru on a number of occasions was in a must-win situation with black, so he played the Dutch. Mm-hmm. So perhaps those 2 games, at least those 2 games in which Hikaru played the Dutch against Ding, could have been Catalans, if not for the fact that Ding was leading in the set, and Hikaru did not feel like the Catalan would offer him enough of a winning shot, which I think is extremely fair. Catalan against an experienced Catalan player is going to give black close to no winning chances whatsoever. It's very, very solid, at least out of the opening. Of course, in a blitz game, the fact that it's completely equal out of the opening is less relevant because you still have to play, but it's understandable that he opted for the Dutch instead.
Very good. And turning our attention to the position at hand, I want to use the half-open A file for the move knight b6, Peter, but is that going to bring white any joy?
I'm not sure. I've also been looking at that, but I think black is reasonably comfortable here. Mm-hmm. I suspect he is not all that worried. The bishop on b4 is quite a solidly placed piece. We don't really have much in a way of prospects for this bishop on c1, and I think white needs a couple of tempi here for any hopes for an advantage. I don't know, if let's say bishop e3, and black needs to make some kind of a really non-committal move, maybe like, I don't know, a6. a6 is not bad, but I suspect there might be sharper attempts. And maybe, like, let's say if we imagine white going knight g5 and black actually continuing to help him by chasing the knight to good squares and then taking. This position I'm beginning to like for white.
Right.
It's probably still fine for black with precise play, but I'm beginning to like this. Rook fc1 will actually create a threat and so on. And knight b6 has been played, so we'll see. We'll see if my assessment is correct. I will also mention that knight takes e8 is not a given. You can make an argument for knight c4, attacking the pawn on e5. I'm not sure if it's a good argument, but you can make an argument.
Yeah, I had a kind of a idea fixé there. Actually, now I'm looking at it, knight c4 might simply be better. There is a line, and talk about the material imbalance that might occur after rook e8.
I was going to mention that as well. It's very nice that you bring this up. Knight e8, we have this tactic of knight takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook e5, and bishop f4. And very importantly, I think bishop d6 is completely unplayable because of rook fd1. And because black does not have a luft for his king, he just loses material because he cannot really keep the bishop on the diagonal due to the back rank issues. Therefore, after bishop f4, the skewer more or less forces black to play knight d7. But I couldn't quite come to a definitive conclusion about this. Rook fd1 still looks very attractive. Black has, but I think maybe rook e8 is fine. I thought black absolutely had to play f6 here to stop rook takes d7. And after f6, I was very curious about the move bishop h3, attacking the knight on d7 and still keeping both of black rooks on this hook on the 4b8 diagonal.
This looks like a nice initiative.
But rook e8 might be good enough because I think this forces white to take. And let's say we take on a7, black goes knight c6. This is probably a very playable position for black. But all of this is now irrelevant because Ding did end up taking on c8. Yeah.
Well, irrelevant or not, that material imbalance there, because it just looked like you were getting a rook and two pawns for two minor pieces. Man, I got to tell you, that's a big controversy today. I mean, is it always position specific in your mind, Peter, or do you have preference?
I think it's possible to draw some conclusions. Like some things I think will hold true regardless of what the position will look like. For instance, one thing I always try to get across when I discuss endgames, let's say like this one, to come back to, or maybe actually come back to this endgame. I think this one maybe it's not that immediately obvious, but generally speaking, endgames with this material imbalance are much better for the side with the rook and pawns if it's one rook against 0, whereas two rooks against 1 are generally quite good for the pieces, or at least better for the pieces compared, because I think it's important that you have a rook on the board to counter at least some of the activity your opponent's rook can develop. So if you imagine in this position somehow, let's say if this happens, I think white is instantly slightly happier about life. This particular endgame is still not good for white because one of his two pawns that he has with the rook is a doubled pawn on the b file, which is really not going anywhere. But if we imagine this this pawn is not on b3 but on c3, this one probably is slightly better for white. And let's say this one, I would say, isn't. But once again, this is a very, very general thing, which I do believe to be true, but it has sort of limited utility. Mainly, you have to look at do the light pieces have good stable squares to occupy? How active are the rooks? Do the rooks have targets in the sense that other weak pawns to attack and so on, other good files for the rooks. So you do have to judge it on a case by case.
Wow, that just feels like an incredible educative moment, if you ask me, folks. Current position here.
Yeah, we were here a moment ago. We were discussing this position, and I did play 7a6 here, not just because I was looking for a passing move for black, but also I suspect it's hanging. I suspect you can take on a7 if black does absolutely nothing in this position. So it might be a relevant move we have to discuss. I'm still very tempted to go, let's say, knight f6 d5 and try to justify our play tactically, but knight d5 might just not work. Move by move.
Take a look at that pawn sacrifice. Munch.
Yeah, apart from bishop a7, I'm also trying to calculate knight takes e5. Okay. I don't think it quite works out. After knight e3, knight takes e6, knight takes f1. Sadly, that bishop is still alive. Sadly for white, I mean. Right. That bishop is still alive, and we don't have the knight e7 check tactic, so we have to take it, and the knight actually escapes. And then I guess black is reasonably happy with life. I suspect it probably ends up being close to equality. Maybe even not that, because we cannot take on a7 because of rook c1 check. Whoops. And once again, back rank. And we also, I think, cannot take on b7. Maybe we can. Yeah, maybe this is how we equalize. We take on b7 because rook b8 appears very strong, but actually rook takes a7 defends everything. But yeah, probably white is not forced to play a line which appears to lead to mass simplifications. Bishop takes a7 is very critical now. I was looking at something like e5, e4 here.
Okay.
This is how I was trying in my mind to justify playing knight d5, but this is very committal because I'm trying to play e4 and then perhaps support it with f7, f5 after, let's say, knight g5 or knight h4. But if that doesn't work out for me, if somehow this structure collapses, I will have given up a healthy pawn on a7 for nothing. So I'm really unsure about this.
Yeah, the play there doesn't look to be enough. Knight d5, the desirable knight d5, as you say, just might be unfortunately unplayable. The alternative, I think you mentioned the alternative, right, Peter?
I think a6 is probably the move you make if you don't want to think too much, so to speak.
Is there a consideration, for example, b6? You mentioned knight g5. And just because of the, I don't know, double pawns after knight b6, knight g5, this, let's say knight d4. Just let's say I'm groveling for a draw on bishops of opposite color. Am I taking too many liberties?
I'm not entirely sure. This might be playable, but just on general grounds, I really dislike the idea of robbing my knight on c6 of its support on b7. Knight g5 is not for something like rook fc1 might happen, and Hikaru actually goes for something very concrete here. He's played e5, e4, a move I considered but was very unsure if I want to allow knight g5, because now this pawn on e4 is under severe pressure. I guess he has calculated rook f8 and determined that he will be able to hold it. And Ding quite quickly agrees with him by playing knight d4.
Knight d4. So could we just investigate what Hikaru might have been calculating? e4, knight g5, bishop a7, h6, I'm assuming is what Hikaru
if you force white to play knight h3, I assume you're not that unhappy. I don't quite know how he was intending to continue here, but it really doesn't look all that threatening. We can maybe even afford to play g7, g5 here just to make sure that knight doesn't come back anytime soon. And then play for positional compensation aimed mainly at exploiting this really horribly placed piece.
Fair enough. I mean, one bad piece in the position can ruin the whole position. So knight d4 was Ding Liren's choice.
And bishop c5 played very, very quickly by Hikaru. Also understandable, because after knight d4, we were definitely threatening knight takes and rook takes a7. And if you take on d4, your entire position is now on fire. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes e4 is a huge threat. a7 is still hanging. It's pretty much unplayable. I think you cannot really afford to do that. And after bishop c5, it's a lot healthier, because I think making sure that the pawn on e4 survives is absolutely priority number one here for black.
Yeah, the pawn on e4 especially contains, if you will, the bishop on g2, and can Ding play for an advantage here?
I mean, the most direct way to continue here with white is, of course, simply to take on c6. Intermission on e3 is impossible because of knight e7 check, so we have to take on c6. White takes on c5, takes on a7. I assume the plan here is to play rook b5. I'm not entirely sure, but that would be my initial reaction. Probably Hikaru is intending rook b5. And I'm looking in this position, and I'm trying to figure out what I think about, let's say, rook fc1, rook b3, rook c2. Because if you add two moves to this position for white, I think e3 and h3, this might become somewhat awkward for black, because the pawn on e4 is a constant source of some worry, maybe not major worry, but some worry. Let's just make a couple of passing moves here, just to illustrate what I mean. If we have this position on the board, the rook on b3 looks quite beautiful, but it's not currently attacking anything. And in particular, if I'm in time to play bishop f1, bishop c4, and then drive the rook away from b3, perhaps play b3 myself, black's position will require some attention, because he's a little bit tied down to the protection of these two pawns. But because obviously white will not be allowed to make 5 moves in a row here, some kind of rook d8, d1, b1 counterplay probably could be quite strong. Starting with rook d8 immediately and threatening that incursion.
Gotcha. My first impression is things look a little bit even Steven in the most direct route. But no, having said that, well, I don't see a real alternative for white to this direct route, Peter.
Yeah, I think he's gone for it. I assume because, I mean, this is winning some material for now. So this must have been the first thing he checked. So the fact that he paused for about 3 minutes, considering I'm guessing knight f5 as a second option, maybe is the obvious second option here. But he ends up still going exactly for the position we discussed. You can also play rook a3 now and say, I'm not obliged to give back the b pawn straight away. But black will develop a lot of counterplay here with either rook d8 or perhaps rook c8 is also playable. Let's say rook d8, rook c1, g6 or something like that. And then the rook lands either on d2 or on d1 and starts creating issues.
Now, that was a very important moment because I always had a principle, Peter. You take the last 2 rook moves back for just a second, if you go back 2 ply, I automatically, as black, want to play the move rook c8 and give my opponent the d file. I'll take the c file. I'll give my opponent the d file, and the reason is because the knight on f6 covers d7.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's probably healthier to do it this way.
Exactly.
Just if to make possible.
Sure. All just being equal. Yeah.
Just to make sure that rook d7 is never a threat. I would tend to agree with you here. And Ding, as you can see, has not played rook a3 yet, so
just rook a3 in principle looks kind of, well, I don't know, too defensive, too defensive. I liked your rook c1 a moment ago much better in rook b3.
But I think the issue with rook d1, rook b1 counterplay is quite significant. Let's say we go rook d8 here, and let's say white plays, I don't know, bishop f1 or h3, pick one.
I like bishop h3, actually.
Bishop h3, okay. That is actually quite clever with those intentions, yeah.
Right. And I'm thinking that if I can get... It's really funny. Play move h6. Just be cooperative for a moment. Bishop c8 and b6. Be very, very, very cooperative. And now, exactly. Bishop a6 and rook c7, and you mentioned...
Actually, bishop a6 is maybe stronger. Yeah, bishop a6 with that threat.
Exactly. You mentioned just lining up for the f7 pawn is really good for white, Peter. This looks promising.
Yeah, but... interestingly, Ding does go with the quieter option of rook c3, rook a3, and now we will find out if Hikaru agrees with you on the relative strength of d8 and c8 squares for the rook, because I expect the rook will go somewhere here. I don't think a waiting move here makes much sense. So we'll see which one he prefers. I think c8 is probably better. I think I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's assume rook c8, just for argument's sake. Peter, what would you do with white? Would you feel, number one, do you feel white's better at all, or what's your feeling? What's going on?
I think black probably is fine because it's just difficult to stop rook d2 comfortably. We can play rook c1, and black does have to secure his back rank here. And by the way, he played rook d8. I don't know why.
Your instinct turned out to be correct. By the way, I've just been told that unfortunately Ding Liren, who is playing from China, has lost connection. Ooh,
he has returned since, but
okay.
His connection appears to be once again a source of worry. We'll be monitoring that situation, hoping that nothing really happens. Rook a1 is a move I completely missed. This is very clever by Ding, and he will now potentially have time to go rook a8, trade one pair of rooks, and then come back to a3.
So for example, king f8, right?
Yeah, king f8. I still want to play rook a8.
And we munch and king e7.
Munch, king e7, I go back to a3.
And
but I suspect something like rook d5, rook d2 still equalizes somehow. You also have the option of having the king on c7, but I don't think it's great because that, if in this position you ask white to trade on your terms and play king e7, we can take. But yeah, I'm just not giving a check here. I think I'm going rook a3 anyway.
Right.
I don't know if having it on d8 or on e7 is better for black. I think it's, once again, it will end up depending on precise calculations. It's difficult to judge on general grounds.
I've always been, how do you say, charmed. I think that's a good word. I've always been charmed by a really active king. So in that variation, I was thinking that after your rook a3, we traded rooks. There was a munch. King could zip its way to b4 and maybe tie white down somewhat. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
yeah, but I'm just. I don't disagree with you, but Hikaru actually went the third way and just ignored king f8 altogether and kept the king on g7. So Hikaru doesn't really feel like the king needs to go very far. I think he's happy with the king where it is.
So just for our audience, what I was suggesting to Peter, like my approach might have been this exact position, except black has a king on b4.
Well, I mean, the issue with that, Yaz, as you I'm sure well understand, is that it doesn't actually have wings,
and it would be illegal just to put the king on
so it would take black quite some time to get it, even with the help of king f8 and then king e7. It would take him some time, and white probably would be in time to play something like e3, h3, bishop f1, bishop c4, and then your counterplay would. I think they're actually, this might just be a draw now. They're already repeating. Hikaru played rook c5, and after rook a7, he played rook b5, rook a3, rook c5. And Ding doesn't seem very interested in trying not to play rook a7 in that position. So you can play something like, once again, I don't know, h3, rook c1, bishop f1. But my suspicion is Ding doesn't really believe he is better here. And I would tend to agree with it, because after, let's say, e4, e3, you might regret playing for a win.
Exactly. I'd get nervous as white. Well, somebody who will most happily agree with everything we say, Peter, a big shout out. Thank you, Magnus Carlsen, for joining us. Hello.
Hey, but
what's up?
Make your shout out first.
What's up? How are you doing?
No, I'm just joining, so I haven't really seen what's happened so far.
Of these two players, one of them is going to be your opponent in the semis, Magnus. Do you have any particular preference as to who you'd like to play?
I'd like to play the person who wins the match. That's my preference.
Deep thoughts, Magnus. Yes. Deep thoughts.
That's the sort of expert commentary you pay the big bucks for.
Yeah, we've come to expect.
No grudge opponents, huh?
No, I think either way they're extremely strong and worthy opponents. So I'm fine either way, and just looking forward to an excellent match today.
Excellent. Peter, what's happening?
Well, Hikaru, I think if he goes rook b5, because rook a3 is more or less completely forced. Rook b5 is a draw. It's not just a draw for it is a draw, because rook a3 will be a threefold. So I think Hikaru is trying to figure out if he is better after rook c1. It looks a bit strange because black often in those positions will be 2 pawns down, but maybe he can still try something like, I don't know, in some order, e3 and then knight g4.
Magnus, jump in.
E3, then f3, right?
Yeah, the problem is f3, cutting off all the ways the knight.
Finals, which will begin tomorrow, same time, same channel, have been secure, and we have the 4 semi-finalists. Again, Magnus, sorry, I think you got cut off there.